On your mark, get set. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, hermanas y hermanos, welcome to the Heartland Café. And we are here for another sort of a special edition of the Live from the Heartland Show. This time it's Penny Rosemont who took the initiative. Let's hear it for Penny Rosemont. And she enlisted Katie Hogan and myself. I'm Michael James. It said our good pal Dennis was coming to town, and it was probably good that we put on an event. And we pull in two other famed civil rights lawyers in our midst. And that would be, in addition to Dennis Cunningham, we're going to have Flint Taylor and Michael Deutsch. Now, roughly 50 years ago to the day, actually it'll be on the 28th, I was in a little green Volkswagen critter of a car moving into Washington, D.C., surrounded by buses filled with people on the Freedom Road, going to the March on Washington. And I got to say, as a young guy who had followed the Americans for Democratic Action, excuse me, talking too loud? Yeah, just a little. Okay, that's Katie. She's always helping me out. I love it. You know, and like guys like Walter Reuther, and was following civil rights. I also was reading the New York Times, and I was real aware of how the New York Times, in the article in the New York Times, talked about John Lewis, now congressman, who was then head of SNCC, having his the call for freedom and jobs watered down to the liking of the president. And I have to say that I came out of the March on Washington pretty inspired, convinced that we were moving to a better place. I've been accused over time of being a meliorist, believing that things get better. I like to stay on that track, even though I have been shown and told that it isn't necessarily true. But I was a young guy full of enthusiasm. A few years later, I had moved further to the left and got myself in a little trouble during a days of rage. And a guy named Dennis Cunningham was my first lawyer. And I don't know if it was his acumen and his ability that kept working it, but we eventually were going to go through a fixer. And I was facing a lot of time, but lo and behold, Dennis kept coming into court. We'd drive down there. We'd have a great time on the way to court. And eventually there was a different judge, and it all worked out really simply. On a more serious note, the three gentlemen we have with us here tonight have worked on some very important cases in our lifetime. From the murder and the assassination of Fred Hampton to the Attica Rebellion, the Judy Bari case, and even more recently, the John Burge case. And there are many other things that these guys and their cohorts, companions, comrades at the People's Law Office, and even beyond that, have been working on. We're in a pretty serious time. We're in a time when we think that things get better, and in many ways, some things have gotten better, and in some ways, things have gotten worse. I am reminded whenever I'm on this stage of two guys that we had here at different times. Both of them faced kind of contrary legislatures, the first being Harold Washington, who was here 2 nights before the primary to a packed house, and it was very wonderful, and we all know the opposition that he faced within the city council. A little bit later, we had a young guy running for the Senate named Barack Obama, who was pretty slick when I asked him some difficult questions, either about Cuba or hemp being grown by Illinois farmers. But we were glad that he was elected, and I'm still glad that he is a president compared to who he ran against. But we know that whether it's what goes on behind the scenes, whether it's the legislature that stands in opposition to him, or whether he just decided on a certain track, things have not gone as we would have liked them to go in a number of cases. So we're going to talk about some of these issues. We're talking tonight about political repression in the time of Obama, in the era of Obama. Most of the people in this room, I'm happy to see you. I'm also sorry to say that a number of you are almost my age. And we certainly are about keeping our bodies and our minds clear and healthy, and we have a lot of work to do ahead of us. And I think we're going to be a generation of oldsters that really lay it on some younger people who need some changing. How many of you did not sign the sign-in sheet so that we know exactly who's here? I'm passing this around. We'd like to have your email. That's really what I'm after, because I've heard many stories about people saying the promotion for this wasn't as good as it could have been. I have to say we sent emails to 1 million people. Someone reported that a good friend of ours down in Louisville, Jeff Siegel, who was active here in the old days, was the person who told them about this. And I want to make sure that you all are in the loop, because we have a radio show that Katie and I host every Saturday morning called the Live from the Heartland Show. And we have some wonderful people working with us. We have Paul Wozniak, we have Mary Wozniak, we have Hal James over here. We shoot video, we put it up on youtube.com/Heartland Media, and now it's on CAN TV. So if you sign that sheet, you're going to be on my list, and I'm going to get information to you.
What do you need my address for?
I just want your email, Hannah. And Hannah is sporting a Leonard Peltier t-shirt that we are very proud that we helped put out. Okay. I had one little bit of information that I was clued into by Flint Taylor and Michael Deutsch the other day. And it was that things are still going on as some of us remember. Some of us were chased around by the Red Squad in the old days. Well, lo and behold, they have a new team, apparently, because we have a report that the People's Law Office got that said the team members were here observing a meeting. We don't know if it was Occupy, it could have been something else, but people were here. And they give a detailed report about groups of people sitting around, but they do report that they didn't hear anything that was important. But they were here. So if any of you from the police department are here, other than being radical police persons, just go ahead, observe us, and whatever you want to note, that's fine, because we're not going away. Okay. You had enough? Time to go? Okay. So that's it. Katie's ready. Katie Hogan is going to be the, because she's sharper than I am, and doesn't blurt out as many of things. She's going to come up. There's a lot of notable people in the audience, and wonderful people. I do want to just say hello to all of you. I do want to say David Orr is here, and I got to say he's a very important advisor in my life. And I could go around the room and do that. I see members of Old Rising Up Angry. There's some people from the RCP that we've argued with in the past, but we have people from a lot of groups here. And what I think is whoever is working to change the planet, to change the globe, is okay in my eyes. So keep doing good in the world. The world needs all the good that you do. And I will now like to introduce to you Katie Hogan. There you go.
That's Michael James. Let's hear it for Michael James. He's a good activist continually for his entire life, like a few other people in the room, and he's been a very good partner to me in this establishment. So this is going to be some good information from some people who know. That's why I know you're here. So we're going to let the guys at it. Sorry that it's all guys, just happened that way. Sorry they're all white, you know. We tried. This just is that day, okay? It's a white guy day. Please, nothing personal. But the reason these guys are special is that they have fought the good fight continually over decades and done it in the way that they know how, which is legally. and winning money for the survivors of the Hampton Raid, the survivors of the Attica Rebellion. I mean, some pretty significant and hairy moments in our time here. So these are big players who can explain a few things. Mainly what Penelope came to us with was this notion of human rights and the crisis in human rights at this time, unbelievably, at this time of Obama's reign. Those of us who were here for the Harold Washington years understand entirely how it works when people don't want the guy in charge to get credit for anything. So there's a certain familiarity to what's going on nationally to those of us here in Chicago. But too little too late is still not good enough for us. And so we have to learn how to find some people to occupy offices who are not afraid to stand up and say what it is. So, and that's on every level, local to national. So without further ado, I think what we decided was that Michael Deutsch would kick us off and set a context. When Michael finishes, we will hear from, we'll draw straws, the other two guys. Yeah. And after a little bit of that sort of thing, we have time and space for people to raise questions from the body, as it were. I'm trying to figure out where the music is coming from, but I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one that hears it. It's all in my head. Okay, I'm used to that. Fine. Okay, really so glad that you're here. So glad the air conditioning is working. 37 years in this place, not always has the air conditioned work inside. So we're thrilled. And let's welcome you and say hello, Michael.
Hello, Michael.
And you can stay seated or you can come up here. All right.
Over the 40 years plus that we've all been working, fighting repression in the courts primarily, we've also been speaking about it. And one of the things I want to say before I actually begin is that we want to be clear that just because we're telling you a series of horrible things that are happening, we're not telling you to hide under your pillow and in your house. The only way to fight repression is to be vocal and educate other people about it. So the fact that we're in a very difficult time, in our opinion, in terms of what's happening, doesn't mean that the answer is to give up. The answer is to continue to fight, and that's been our experience of fighting many cases that have taken decades, literally, the Hampton case, the Attica case, and other cases. It's a long struggle, it's a difficult struggle, but you do get victories within that, and as part of the victories, you educate people. Now, a lot of people say, well, I don't care about surveillance, I'm not doing anything wrong, I'm not involved in terrorism, so why should I care about what the government is doing abroad or even in this country? But the issue is not, the war on terrorism, in our view, is just a cover. It's a cover for a systematic strategy to repress all political resistance, abroad and in this country. It's part of what's been written about and theorized about as a counterinsurgency strategy. And the people began writing about this in the 60s, and there's two very famous books, one called Peacekeeping in a Democratic Society, and another one called Low Intensity Warfare, were written by leaders of the British military who were involved in these anti-colonial struggles, particularly in Northern Ireland. And they talked about the basics of counterinsurgency, which is necessary to control potentially insurgent communities. And basically their theory, which has been adopted and developed and even written about by General Petraeus in his dissertations about counterinsurgency, is that repression must be permanent. Even at times when there's very little activity, the role of the people who are manipulating a counterinsurgency is to surveil the community, to build dossiers on the community, to fingerprint. Now we have DNA testing, to infiltrate organizations, and in fact to be able to be ready and know about who all the actors are in potential resistance. Now, you all are familiar with the NSA, and there's no question now with all the revelations that the NSA knows everything. They know our phone calls, they know our emails, they know our text messages, they can capture our cell phones, and this has been going on for 40 years. In fact, in 1975, the Church Commission had some of the first view of the NSA, outside view of the NSA, and Senator Church talked about how we're approaching an abyss, and once we go over the abyss, we're doomed. And he talked about what he had learned by looking at the NSA over 40 years ago. So you have surveillance and infiltration as one of the elements of counterinsurgency. The other element that's used particularly in democratic countries, and that's what they're talking about, peacekeeping in a democratic society, is using the law, changing the law, making sure that things are done and look to be like neutral, that they're not in any way intended to repress, but in fact they change the law to be able to use it against potentially movements, communities that are in resistance. And we've seen that. We're going to go into it more, but basically we've seen now a preventive detention. We've seen the use of criminalizing people who are involved in First Amendment activity. We've seen torture being covered up, rendition being covered up. You cannot even go to court and sue for a violation of your rights because there's a thing called the state secrets privilege, which allows the government to say this would uncover classified information, and there we can't let it do it, and they dismiss all these cases about people who have been victims of torture or victims of rendition or spied upon. Anything that's going to release classified information has been, you can't sue anymore in court about it. And then the other major element of counterinsurgency is the use of the media, controlling the media, making sure the media is always portraying the views of the government and not portraying independent views or not supporting people that are involved in resistance or militancy. And what we have seen in the since 2001 particularly, we've seen the implementation of a counterinsurgency strategy, not only in the United States, but all over. The U.S. is involved all over, even listening to what's going on in the UN, listening to what's going on in Africa, in Egypt. They're involved in every way, planning and plotting to make sure there is no resistance. And one of the things that I just want to read to you very quickly, what Frank's Church said, looking at the NSA in 1975, the NSA's capability can be turned on the American people and no American would have any privacy left. There would be no place to hide. If this government ever became a tyranny, the technological capacity that the intelligence community has given the government could enable it to impose total tyranny, and there would be no way to fight back because the most careful effort to combine together in resistance to the government, no matter how privately it was done, is within the reach of the government to know. And this is 40 years ago that he's talking about this. So the government is knowing and intentionally telling you that we're fighting terrorism, but it's well beyond terrorism. It's about stifling any type of political resistance in this country.
Flint Taylor.
When I first saw the title of this presentation, I thought maybe it was supposed to be Depression in the Age of Obama. Because after I made out my list, which was 13 to 15 different items of importance having to do with repression, and it was by no means all-inclusive. one could get somewhat depressed about the era that we're living in. And perhaps the reason that they selected 3 old white men to come up here and talk about it is because... I didn't say old. I threw that part in. But is because we have somehow, in some way, spanned all those decades and stand here to not only tell the tale, but to continue the resistance and the fight. And if there's... And if there's something that we all share in our office and together, is that spirit that we want to bring what we know and what we feel to younger people. Because, of course, our generation is moving onward and, I guess, upward. And we need very much to rely on younger people. And we need to impart what we know to them. And we need to also listen to them and take leadership from them when the occasion arises. I want to speak a little bit about how what Michael talked about in terms of the surveillance state interlocks with repression in this country in terms of the criminal, quote, justice system. And specifically in New York recently, we heard about a very significant decision with regard to stop and frisk. And stop and frisk is part and parcel of that idea of mass control and mass incarceration of primarily African American, but of poor people, mostly of color, in this country. And we can't think only about the surveillance state without thinking about that interlocking an important aspect of repression, that being mass incarceration, stop and frisk, police torture, torture by means of supermax prisons, just to name a few of the aspects of the criminal justice system that impact on people in this society at this time under Obama. And another aspect, of course, is the drug war, the failed drug war, and the fact of mandatory minimum sentences. And we see that over the years that has been a technique to lock up so many young people, young African American people. And it's using the device of crack cocaine, which at one point you could be sentenced 100 times more of a sentence than you would if you were caught with regular cocaine. Now it's down to 18. But in any event, all of those aspects of interlocking repression that are very much focused and very much reflect the racism of this society, going all the way back to slavery, Jim Crow, lynching, that's all part of what we're talking about today. And so I think that sometimes we may want to focus a little bit too much on just the surveillance aspect of it, because that is so wide-ranging and deals with white people and people of color. But we must see the fact that stop and frisk and all that I mentioned is also an important part of that. You know, for example, that those contact cards that they take in New York and here in Chicago, those go into a computer so they can then track all of those people that they stop, and whether they find drugs on them or find guns on them or not, they're all into that system, the same way that people who are arrested, the same way that people are convicted. The idea of DNA and being able to follow people based on DNA. So all of that is very important to consider when we talk about the surveillance state and we talk about the condition of this society and the condition of repression in this country at this time. And I'll turn it over to Dennis now.
Well, I'm going to open my mouth, some will come out. The position that we're in, that occurs to us because of what we've been doing these last many years, is something that we also experienced as something that developed during all those years. Even though we can go back to the assassination of Fred Hampton, if there was ever an act of repression, that was it. I mean, or the massacre at Attica was an act of repression within a prison that was equally extreme, maybe more so. The willingness, in other words, of the enforcers to go all the way is not something new. The willingness, as Michael points out by referring back to the church committee, of the enforcement establishment to go as far as their technology and their secrecy would take them in combating what they saw as a political menace was already established 40 years ago. And yet it has developed since then in ways which we're aware of in a lot of ways. We're certainly, and which are extended, deepened, perfected, and which have had results over time. The prison population went up by factor of 5 or 6, just like the stock market did. They're the only two things that went up that much in the time, say, from Reagan. There's a lot of scholarship and a lot of deep thought that goes into trying to analyze what happened and in what sequence and what were the key things that brought the changes or that solidified the control of the population that the 1% and its minions enjoy now in our country and in the rest of the world. The Rumsfeld and Cheney were part of something was called the Project for the New American Century. They were about what needed to be done so that the military forces of the United States, or military and political forces, could have what they call full spectrum dominance of the entire world. The U.S. Defense Department has bases in 150, 160 countries. You hear it on the Super Bowl. Our broadcast today is going out to our men and women in uniform defending our freedoms in 170 countries, or whatever it is. What are those troops doing in those countries? What other country has troops stationed in any other country? Garrison in any other country? It's this country, and it's this establishment, and it's this 1%, I think is really good to put your finger on, but they've got several other percentage points of people aligned with them, particularly enforcers of one kind or another of that dominance, and people working to develop that dominance, working to perfect the devices by which that dominance is achieved, and planning for the times when other devices, other modes, other means will be needed in order to control the populations that they mean to dominate. That it's necessary for them, where the they is, to continue to dominate. For what reason? Well, I don't know that there's another reason besides to enable their continuing accumulation of capital, as it were, to use some loaded notion. That goes on and has its own inherent dynamic that almost is completely, it's independent of any person or any little group. There's not like a little room where they meet and do it. It just does it for itself. It presents one after another of opportunities and of needs. And the needs are what we're talking about, is the need to repress the population that don't like populations, that don't like being put in that position where they're dominated and where they're deprived of the means to enjoy a decent life. You know, because the imperatives of capitalism, let's use another loaded word, are such that they have to keep going ahead and keep the accumulation going. And this guy David Harvey points out, you get in a period where the accumulation is accomplished by dispossession. That's what foreclosures are about. That's what wiping out pension funds are about. That's what, you know, eliminating however many millions of jobs went down the tubes in the recent paroxysm of capitalism. That happened in this country and reverberated around the world. So these methodologies exist, these systems exist, these trends exist, the mass incarceration, for example, the military developments, the use of drones, God knows. The drones are like a development, right? They developed out of the difficulties that were encountered by when they designate people as enemy combatants, and then they got to torture them and they got to hold them without lawyers or trials or charges or anything, and they get a lot of hot water for it. Better to just kill them. You know, you can drone them out. And you don't have to, you could be more selective, and people don't pay that much attention to it, and it's under a lot more control, and it's easier to regulate and easier to carry on without these kind of difficulties that were encountered just a few short years ago when the big jump occurred. We know a big jump occurred after 9/11, right? A big move was made to consolidate this power. But we have to understand that the struggles that we see around us, that we get involved in, are all related to that basic condition that we're in, over against this element that wants control, that wants domination, and wants to retain the power and the capacity to dominate anybody that needs dominating from their point of view. I mean, I don't want to just go on riffing about it. But it's something that it's incumbent on us, I think, as political people, that realize that those general conditions exist and that they have to be resisted, or they will indeed triumph and consolidate their hold, and they've proved very powerful, those forces, and our force against it has not been notably powerful in certain situations, maybe. I mean, certain really good things happened, or really helpful things happened, when Occupy showed up and identified the 1%. This was a big step just mentally for everyone to take, just in terms of common understanding. But the common understanding is what's the most important, is because that way you realize whatever you're dealing with, wherever you come up against the machine, it's that same machine that everybody else is up against. And so that a particularized struggle, a local struggle, an individual struggle, or a group struggle is part of the whole struggle, and it needs to be strategized and worked on with that understanding, because otherwise there's too much wheel spinning and not enough connection to the possibility of a force that could develop, that could resist this power that we're up against. I'm going to say that and be done.
I just wanted to...
Yeah, thank you. We're trying to get a dialogue.
Yeah, I just wanted to just let you focus on these things that have happened in the past. For example, people have been assassinated, there have been surveillance, there's been criminalizing political activity. But all those things were illegal. They were illegal under U.S. law, and in fact, years later when they were uncovered, like COINTELPRO or the assassinations, they were condemned by the U.S. Congress, and in fact certain FBI agents were even initially prosecuted. Today those things are legal. It is legal to assassinate somebody from a drone, and the Attorney General of the United States came here to Northwestern Law School and said, in fact, it's due process. You get due process because it's decided by the Justice Department, the executive branch, who to kill and not kill, and that's okay. And the surveillance is legal. You have a FISA court that spies, and the government has said that's legal. It is now legal to prosecute political activists for engaging in First Amendment activity, which they say is supportive of groups that are on a terrorist list. So, for example, there were these activists in Chicago and in Minnesota that were sponsoring a Palestinian women's tour to speak about what's going on in the occupied territories in Palestine. And they said that by sponsoring that tour, they were providing material support for a terrorist organization and were looking at 15 years in prison. So all these things that have been done by the U.S. government in the past over the years, when uncovered, were determined to be against the law. Now the government's saying, yeah, we're doing it, we're spying, we're killing, we're torturing, but those things are okay because you can't sue us about them, and in fact, our interpretation of the Constitution says they're legal. So they've kind of taken some of these things that the government does and made them legal under their theory of the law.
And made the secrecy about them legal as well.
Exactly.
Basically impenetrable. You come in and say, I was tortured, they throw your case out because the information about it is secret. So there's been a huge advance in the way they exercise their power over this last period of time since 9/11. There's been an enormous step ahead of where they were that criminalizes dissent, essentially, that finds a basis to put you in the wrong and to tell the population at large that you're a menace and a danger, and that they're looking out for they're looking out for the nation's welfare by squashing your movement. And they, well.
Okay.
I mean,
What I want to
don't let's come in here and discourage everybody.
Yeah.
You can
Yippee.
drag everybody and
Okay.
make them go home and put a pillow over there.
Michael Deutsch, you just made the most important point, that, that now things are not illegal. For you all as lawyers who made so many things happen by using the law, protecting people's civil rights or coming back after they've been violated and getting people redress of grievances, given this making terrible things legal on the part of our federal government, what is the plan of attack, say, from a left or progressive legal position? How do you begin to chip away at this stuff? Are there cases that, I mean, I know that you're working on some of the case, the young people who were set up during NATO. Just a word or two about where you see inroads into how to assault this.
Well, it's difficult. Our job has become increasingly more difficult because it's harder to get any type of justice in the courts. Sometimes we get sympathetic jurors. If we can educate them in a criminal case, then we're successful. But as far as convincing judges, the Justice Department have gone along with this. They've agreed to it. There are very few independent judges that are willing to condemn the government or go against the government. So in my view, what you need to do is two things. One is you need to educate people about the truth about what's going on. And it's not about, as I said in the beginning, about a war against terrorism. It's about a war against people who have the potential to resist, and they don't want any resistance in any way. And if they decide to move against you, they're going to. So you have to educate people about that, and then you have to fight in the courtrooms and fight in the media. And, Flynn has been a great example of that around the torture cases and what he's exposed about the torture of the Chicago Police Department against young black youth. So it's a struggle. Every day you have to get up and fight and speak for your clients and speak for the people you represent in a way that people can relate to, because they know that you're speaking about truth and not just a lawyer interested in making money and promoting your career.
But the law is not some finite brick wall type of thing. The law can be resisted, and the law, if you have the mass movement behind you, or if you have people behind you, or you have that information behind you, you can kind of come up against what Michael's talking about. You can move that law back instead of having it come forwards toward you. And that's, I think, as lawyers, that's what we try to do, but we can't do it without the people behind us. If you think about the Trayvon Martin case, or you think about the stop and frisk case, or you think about the torture cases, what is not the variable, but what was involved in all of those cases beyond some creative lawyers and some fight? And that is, there were movements. There were people that were raising those issues. There were people who were sitting in and raising the question of stop and frisk. There were people who were going to City Hall and sitting in and raising hell around the torture cases. And so I think that we can hold a mirror up to what we see now, both in terms of what went before 40, 30 years ago, but also in how people have resisted. And what's good about the technological society, as frightening as it is that people can use it as well. People use it to organize. People use it to communicate. People use it to avoid the mass media and the control that the government has over the mass media, because it can exert, at this point, less control over the internet, although it's certainly fighting to try to exert more control. So I think we have to hold that mirror up, not only to learn and to use that history that we've all, or many of us, have gone through and fought against, but also to tell us those positive stories about how we can continue to fight against this, and so that it won't be just depression in the era of Obama.
Go ahead, Katie.
Okay. I'm going to open it up to a question, a comment, something that was said or something that wasn't said that you want to raise a question about. And I'm going to repeat the question so that it gets on the tape. And who's that? I can't see you.
There's a lady back there.
I'm calling on this one here. Tell me who you are.
My name is Leanne Gaskins.
Hi, Leanne.
Hi. Two things. One, a comment. First, that our civil liberties, most of us here are aware of what's going on in terms of civil liberties. What we haven't computed into this formula is the destruction of healthy food, which is also a civil liberty, since we're not being given healthy food. And the healthy food is creating trouble for our bodies and our planet. And I can give you a story about that, but it's also part of the corporate control over our lives, okay? That's my comment. The other part of my comment is a question. You talk about control. You talk about the issues that those in power are really doing to make less of us and more of them. But there's got to be a reason beyond control and the accumulation of money. there's got to be some way that these guys really understand that in taking the control, they're going to gain what? And I keep thinking about that and I don't have a good answer.
You guys have it?
Thank
you. Thank you.
You have to stay with the money, you know, as a cause. As one of these noted prophets from Nazareth said, you cannot serve God and mammon. If you serve mammon, that's money made into a god, right? Then that's what you do, and that's how your energies and your thoughts are consecrated. Power and money go together. Power is something you can enjoy if in given circumstance. The exercise of power, the making something happen, especially when somebody else doesn't want it to happen. You get satisfaction out of that. You get there's a sick satisfaction, okay, but it's real. I mean, there's not some mystery here. There's the urge for power and profit that it resides in, the human breast, and either is or is not dominant in there, and does or doesn't hook up with others that are the same way and arrange systems. That's the way it's been. In biblical times, the Israelites said, we got the law, but nobody can enforce it. We got to have a king. They went out and got themselves a king because they had no other way they could think of to stop screwing each other. I mean, attacking each other and fighting each other. And some came out of that we're still dealing with. But I don't think you're right about big ag and big pharma and big media and big government and big military and big prison. Those things, they all go together. And they all interact to maintain that kind of control and the position that people are in. They're doing it by exercising power. And they don't, obviously they don't think straight. They don't think about their grandchildren in a world that's going to be left to them. They don't think past, proverbially, the next quarter's bottom line, or whatever it is. The next defense report, or the next step that has to be taken to consolidate this or that operation. I don't think it's a mystery. I think we have to see that it is what we experienced it as, and we have to deal with it as that.
Over here.
I'm wondering, continued use of national security letters, how lawyers and people operate when a client comes to you and says, I need to get my phone number, I can't talk about it, and I have this letter that says I'm not supposed to.
I didn't quite get that. Sorry.
Continued use of national security letters, how lawyers like you gentlemen on the stage deal with a client that comes to them and says, I need to get my story out because I know the government's just crazy, they're shutting my business down, they're doing this, they're doing that. I'm not allowed to talk. It's up to you because I got the letter.
Yeah, she's referring to, under the U.S. Patriot Act, the government has what's called national security letters, and rather than go in front of a judge and subpoena your records, they can just send you a letter saying, we want all your records, and because it's relevant to an investigation. And as part of that, you're not supposed to be able to speak publicly about that the government's trying to get your records. In fact, there's been a struggle around librarians because they've been subpoenaing records of libraries, and the librarians have been told if you speak out, you're violating the law and you can go to jail. It's a difficult question. You have to decide, whether or not you can speak out, whether you want to get a contempt, whether you want to go against that law. We haven't had that problem directly, but I can see other lawyers have, and some of them have been succumbed to secrecy and others have not. But it's also that U.S. Patriot Act, which we haven't mentioned, allows for all these things that were illegal, like sneak and peek. You can go into somebody's house, you can without a search warrant, and you can photograph all their books, all their papers, and then come out, and then 6 months later you can notify them that they've been the subject of a sneak and peek. So the Fourth Amendment is on the ropes, and it's all been legalized, which is really one of the big problems.
Well, following that, the Supreme Court just recently cut back on the Civil Rights Act, and I'm just wondering
The Voting Act.
What your take is on that and any other ability we have to influence the court.
Well, obviously, it's fundamentally a racist decision. As long as you have the present configuration of that court, when you have an issue of that significance, it's going to end up 5-4 like that decision happened. And it's very disturbing. But again, we're seeing a lot of grassroots organizing coming as a result of it. And in fact, part of the Saturday's demonstration in Washington, or a good portion of that, was really focused on the Voter Rights Act and changing it legislatively. So I don't think there's a lot of hope in terms of taking fundamental questions that have to do with race or have to do with surveillance or have to do with anything, the First Amendment or search and seizure, that the Supreme Court is going to be helpful. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean that we should stop trying to organize and change those laws and do whatever we can to raise that issue.
But I think it's also important to realize that's a crooked court. That's a crooked court. Those two guys, Alito and Roberts, got on the court by lying to the senators and telling them that they respected precedent and that they were going to stick to precedent when they got on the bench. And the first thing they did, and what they've done ever since, is to grab every precedent they could find and rip it up. And the Voting Rights Act is an example of that. And there's a First Amendment case, there's an eminent domain case, there's the class action on Walmart, there's case after case already. And not only that, but the courts of appeals, which are the next lowest and which sit all across the country, there's 11 of them now. It's more than 75% of the judges on those courts are members of something called the Federalist Society, which is like a judicial counterpart of the Republicans in California that all sign a pledge that they'll never vote for any tax increase. They sign a pledge. They're part of a secret society. They're committed to the maintenance of the system at all costs, and that's why they've made these changes in the law, and the Congress has, for the same reason, has made the changes in the law. The law, after all, a law, what is a law? The Nazis had a lot of laws that legalized everything they did.
Apartheid, too.
Apartheid was legal. In or about, I don't know, whenever the late 80s, sometime in there, they sat down and made a law in Washington that said they could go loot the savings and loans. And then they turned around and went and looted the savings and loans.
How about Bush versus Gore?
And Bush versus Gore is the capper. Bush versus Gore was a coup d'etat enacted through the law. And if you want to talk about what then happened on 9/11, we'll have another forum.
All right, we'll talk about it all. Mary, will you stand up, Mary, so we can hear you?
Yeah. I was just wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about Bradley Manning and Edward Snowden. I mean, these guys...
You mean Chelsea Manning?
Chelsea, man.
This woman and man is so vilified by the press that it's almost like even on the left, what the hell is happening here? I really would like to talk a little bit about this. To me, I mean, it seemed like such a courageous thing to do. And I think it's
And I was going to say, when the question came up about those national security letters, it's going to take some people who are going to get up and say, screw you, Beck, I'm not going to keep it secret. This stuff is, it's going to take that kind of courage that Manning showed and that Snowden showed. It's going to take that willingness to run ultimate risks, They don't know, Manning didn't know what was going to happen to him, obviously. It was pretty bad what they did right off the bat, and the president pronounced it. He broke the law. That's the first thing out of Obama's mouth when they asked him about Bradley Manning. Well, it's okay he's being tortured at Quantico because he broke the law. Look what they're doing with Snowden. And you're right, they make the whole issue about Snowden. Oh, Snowden got away. What about the stuff he told you? What about the stuff he showed? He rubbed your face in it now. Because Frank Church told you about it 40 years ago.
Michael spoke a bit about the media and its complicity in all of this. And a good local example was about a month or two ago, there was a socialist convention out at O'Hare, and there were about 1,500 people in attendance. And they had this wonderful program where Jeremy Scahill spoke about the Secret War movie that he made about drones in Afghanistan. And then he talked all about the media and their complicity in covering all of this up. And then he introduced Glenn Greenwald, who was talking from some unknown place via Skype. And so you had perhaps the two most courageous journalists talking about the complicity of journalism in general and the media, and the kind of courage that Snowden and Manning and derivatively these two journalists have shown in terms of exposing this is very important. They are today's Daniel Ellsberg, and we should not forget that. Oh, and by the way, the upshot of that is, even though Greenwald actually scooped some stuff that he hadn't put out there, there wasn't a single reporter from the Chicago media there, and it wasn't covered at all.
Yeah, we're still getting happy, aren't we? Okay, Michael.
I just thinking about the future. I'm just wondering, you guys probably come into contact with a lot of young people who want to be lawyers. I have a niece who's at CUNY in New York, and I know they have kind of a progressive program. What is the status of the legal program in American universities? And what is your sense about the kind of people who will be coming along, first as lawyers and later as judges?
They're all going to owe tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars when they get out of school, and they're going to have to go as slaves.
So we're already sucked in?
But actually, there's been a great increase of progressive lawyers joining the National Lawyers Guild, which is the left-wing lawyers group. And in Chicago, there's been a great influx of young lawyers doing mass defense work, representing people who are protesting. They were there for Occupy, they were there for the NATO demonstrations. So we see a lot of young people who are going into law who are progressive. Now, obviously, they're not going to become judges. That's not going to happen. But they can be part of a movement to support people who are in struggle.
Well, Dennis's son is a lawyer, and my daughter's about to go to law school, and so there is hope, and there is definitely hope, and I think that gives us a lot of energy too. That there are young people that want to take up the work and take over and take the baton, so to speak.
Okay, you're next. Tell me your name again. Sorry. Jay.
I should thank you for that rundown of all the things that was codified and used to be illegal. The National Defense Authorization Act legalizing indefinite detention, signed by Obama twice, needs to be on that list, obviously.
Yes.
And I really appreciate your point about the media and education, because I think the other thing that Obama has done that no president before, and certainly not George Bush, was able to do, was the ideological message justifying all that, whether it's Bradley Manning and Edward Snowden,
but also that he came here to Chicago and said that the reason there's no investment in the South Side is because the black people are violent. No, he said that, and there was no.
Who said
the liberals
that?
Were Obama. The liberals were not up in arms. He's saying it's not the deindustrialization of whole sections of this country. It's not mass incarceration. It's the kids wearing baggy pants and the parents not taking personal responsibility. And that's a very important part of that message of this war on terror that's really a counterinsurgency. I think it has to be taken on by anyone who wants to fight against it. And I think, there's another thing. That ideological message has to be part of it. And, I know. I really agree with your point. I think it's very little discussed about this is really a counterinsurgency. And I think because the movements are not active, it's not the 60s. It's very much more a time of hope, mainly quiet, especially when the people who were leading the 60s, the black people. But I think that Edward Snowden and Bradley Manning Chelsea Manning point to the potential in this extreme situation. So I don't know if you have a comment about that Obama ideological message as well.
I just kind of following up on that somewhat. I watched the March on Washington on C-SPAN, and some of it was very troubling to me to see Nancy Pelosi and Eric Holder and Denny Stoyer Denny Hoyer, sorry, speak. Denny Hoyer?
Denny
Denny Hoyer.
It's a funny
Henny Stoyer.
But I came across this quote from Martin Luther King, who had an essay called The Testament of Hope again, that was published after he died, actually. It was a speech he gave. And here's what he said. I think it's important. The Black Revolution is much more than a struggle for the rights of Negroes. It is forcing America to face all its interrelated flaws: racism, poverty, militarism, and materialism. It is exposing evils that are rooted deeply in the whole structure of our society. It reveals systematic rather than superficial flaws and suggests that radical reconstruction of society itself is the real issue to be faced. Now, you weren't getting that too much in the speeches on the March King. So that's the legacy of Martin Luther King, and not, Nancy Pelosi saying what a wonderful thing it is.
Hannah.
Yeah, I just want to say that in the 60s, at least we had Abby Hoffman to bring some humor and to pull young people like me into thinking contrary to like what my father was saying about Vietnam and why black people couldn't get ahead. And how do we on the left expect to what's it called? Inspire young people and educate them and try and make the world not seem like this terrible place that you just want to hide from and do drugs and get away from, but that you can engage and participate. And I heard Pete Seeger talking the other day, and he said, if there's anything that's going to save the human race, it's going to be humor. And yeah, it's terrible, and everything is awful, but if we have any humanity and any hope for youth, that's all I got to say.
Dennis Cunningham, didn't you have a stint at Second City? Speaking of, didn't you?
Yeah.
A little bit?
Yeah, I did.
I always wanted to take a Second City course to make my teaching, more enjoiable. But I couldn't agree with you more. I think we do have to meet people on a lot of different levels. There was a guy. Yeah, I know. Keep trying, Michael. Who's way back there? I can't see.
I wanted to know if there's any hope in what Eric Holder was talking about last week about diminishing the mandatory sentences.
Right.
Well,
Yeah, that's good question.
Deal with what he does, not what he says.
The question was, is there any hope, any reason for hope in or optimism in what Holder did last week in raising the question of cutting the mandatory minimums?
It's not so much what Holder said, it's what's been done and being done by organizations such as Families Against Mandatory Minimum Sentences and other people who are organizing to change the legislation. And finally, after 55 months in office, Holder finally had to say something about this because it's such an outrage that so much of the prisons are filled up with people on these outrageous drug sentences, and you can read about it any day of the week, and it's like women doing 20 years because they were in a room with someone who was selling drugs and getting a life sentence and that kind of thing. And Holder was backed into a position where he had to say the minimum that he could say with regard to how, because of how outrageous and how many people are speaking out, both on the right and the left, about these issues. So he said he was going to tell his prosecutors not to pursue these kinds of sentences in the most outrageous cases. But what they could do is there's a retroactivity question. And some people, the Obama administration is saying this law only applies back to 2010. And there are people who are in jail 1986 onward who this law should who should be released because of this.
Talking about the crack cocaine.
Yeah, the crack cocaine cases, and that Obama and Holder are taking no position on that, and they are actually fighting against that. So there's some hope there, but it's not necessarily what Holder did or what he said, but rather it's because of this critical mass being pushed, partly because of the mass incarceration education and partly because of the education around the drug war, which will ultimately lead to some relief.
Okay, perturbed person.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to bring up something certainly parallel to what you're saying, you haven't touched on. It's the whole issue of preemptive prosecution of Muslims.
Yeah.
Scare out of anyone who goes to a mosque. They're afraid to talk to anybody. I know I've been involved with a lot of, there's so many people who are in jail because the FBI has found mentally disabled, very poor people. They have drummed up, you gotta go help your people. What are you, just some kind of, sissy? They provide the plan, they provide the money, they provide the car, they provide the dummy bomb, they even drive them to the site. And then there's not a single one has ever gotten off. 100% is secret evidence, and the people, the FBI gets criminals who they, make deals with, and some of these guys travel around the country from mosque to mosque to mosque, bringing people in. And isn't that exactly what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's definitely true. The preemptive prosecutions, the entrapment of young Muslim men, enticing them into this plot, which never would have gone anywhere but for the FBI. There's about 400 of those cases that have been prosecuted by the FBI. And they're saying, oh, see how we're fighting terrorism? There's all this. But nothing would have ever happened unless the FBI got involved with the money and the resources. And even in this NATO case in Chicago, where I'm representing this 21-year-old kid who they were infiltrated by undercover Chicago police and encouraged and set up, and all of a sudden they couldn't get him to do anything. So they said, well, we'll make some Molotov cocktails. And then as soon as the cops made them and paid for them, they called him in and arrested him and charged him with terrorism. They're looking at 40 years as a minimum sentence under Illinois state terrorism law, intimidating a substantial portion of the civilian population. That's what the law says. And that's a crime which is a 40-year possible sentence. And it's all part of this, using the laws as a way to suppress people. press people, who are activists.
Once again, we can see the roots, or the recent roots of it back in the day when, with the Black Panthers and the informants involved in the Black Panthers, and setting them up not only for prosecutions, but setting them up for murders, such as Fred Hampton. So history repeats itself, and if the government is allowed to employ these tactics, they'll use them again and again and again. And that's what we're seeing now.
Okay, after you ask the question, can you not stand in the doorway there with the service? Yeah.
What is the constitutional relation of the FISA court to the United States of America in terms of the executive powers?
The question was,
the
what is...
FISA court over and over again, the FISA court made decisions by way there. What constitutionally allows the FISA court to exist?
The constitutionality of the FISA court and its relationship to the federal government.
The FISA court was implemented by the executive department and passed by the Congress.
How long ago, Michael?
1978. They set up this special secret court that provides authority to surveil people who they claim they have evidence of, and they don't need to go in front of a judge to get a court order for it. And it does circumvent the Fourth Amendment, and it violates the Constitution, but they've said, oh no, it's legal, you know, they can do it.
But you're the attorney, and ask me how so? You're the attorney, you're an attorney.
Yeah.
How so? With all respect, how so? How is it legal?
How does it violate the Fourth Amendment?
What is their argument for making it legal, the FISA court?
What is my argument against it?
No, what's their argument?
For the FISA court.
They don't make an argument, they just claim it.
They passed a law that established it, and they appointed a bunch of judges to sit on it. And they told the FBI and other law enforcement, this is how you do it now. You bring it to them, they'll rubber stamp it, and then you go do your thing. They had in the first, whatever it was, 7, 8 years of the FISA court, there were more than 20,000 applications for secret warrants by the FBI and related agencies before the FISA court, and they never turned a single one down. They only raised a question at all about the specifics in 2 cases out of 20,000 and something. So you ask yourself, indeed, it's a very good question. What is this court, and where the hell did it come from?
Well, I'll tell you where it came from. It came from the hearings, the Watergate and the Church Committee. It was supposedly a reform, and then it got totally, I wouldn't say abused, but because it was more than abused, it became a tool for covering what the government was doing before.
Well, there was a decision in the United States Supreme Court in about 1974 or 73, U.S. versus U.S. District Court, where the government in the FBI, trying to catch the Weather Underground, had made a bunch of phone taps of families of people they thought were in the underground, and somebody sued them about it, and the district judge in Detroit said, it's illegal, you can't do that. And then it was appealed, and it was appealed to the United States Supreme Court, and the late Arthur Benoit argued the case. He said you could hear a pin drop in the court when the court asked Robert Mardian, a name that some people might remember, a Dixon lawyer, how are we going to know that if you say that in a foreign intelligence case you have to have a secret wiretap and nobody's going to be able to know about it and you don't need a warrant? How will we know that you're doing this only in the right cases? And that's when he said you could hear a pin drop. And the answer was, you'll just have to trust it. But that's the answer that Obama is giving you. Obama said the other day, on Friday, he acknowledged that many Americans have lost trust in the nation's largest intelligence agency. Shocking thing. He says, between all the safeguards and checks that we put in place within the executive branch and the federal court oversight that takes place on the program and congressional oversight, people are still concerned as to whether their emails are being read or their phone calls are being listened to. No shit. I mean, you can laugh because you know those courts are corrupt, the Congress is corrupt, and the executive is corrupt, this government is corrupt when it comes to constitutional rights, and when it comes to the right to be let alone, and the right to organize for change, which is what it's about.
Okay, David's hand.
What do you think the chances?
Stand up, David.
I think we all had hoped that the Occupy movement was going to be responding to a lot of things we're talking about, and I think a lot of us also thought the Obama election was going to respond. I think it did for me in many cases, but they disappointed me in others. It's the lesser, much lesser of two evils. We made some strides racially, I think. But anyway, what's the impetus for the next movement? Is it going to be Occupy coming back and we're all going to have to step up? We have the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement converging to create the movement in the 60s. Is it going to be some kind of social movement that has to converge with this awareness that we have, or what's the next step?
Good question.
That's the kind of question you should ask everybody in this room, not just these guys
I
out
think
here.
everybody asks themselves in the mirror, what are we gonna
I think that's one of the subtitles of tonight's presentation is, and what are we going to do about it?
But I think it's not right to think, well, Occupy is over. All the people that were in Occupy, I don't think any of them changed their mind about how they felt and make them go out there in the first place and make them join up. I think that's the thing. It's like something to join, something to get down with. Fight it. I mean, our leaders are Snowden and Manning, right? Our leaders are the people that are imprisoned in the hunger strike in California that are fighting solitary confinement. Solitary confinement, prolonged solitary confinement is torture. They tell them, you can get out of here if you snitch. That's trying to get information or confession out of a person. That's the definition of torture. When you inflict physical or psychological pain, and believe me, solitary is physically painful as well as psychologically and emotionally devastating. And it's done with coercion, with the coercive purpose of trying to get them to give confessions, to give information. That violates the UN Charter. That violates the Convention on Torture. Do you think they care about that? Do you think Jerry Brown gives a red hot shit about whether or not his prison system violates the Geneva Convention? Somebody got to care about that. We got to go find them and join up with them.
Ms. Callahan?
Yeah, Dennis, this question is for you. I wish you would talk about 911 and where the left is regarding holding those fully responsible for that.
I can talk all day about it because
The
I
question
worked
was,
on it.
Dennis,
I took
could you
on
talk about
I
911?
had a case that accused Cheney and Rumsfeld with a conspiracy to help 9/11 succeed, the 9/11 attack succeed. And we were thrown out of court and we were fined by the United States Court of Appeals, 2 judges, one of whom has just been appointed to the FISA court, 3 judges who were the ones that said that Lynn Stewart had to go back and get resentenced because their sentence was too lenient. The judges who took away the verdicts that we won in the Attica cases for the brothers. And they said, you can't say that. You should have known that appeal that you made here from having your case thrown out was frivolous and you shouldn't have brought it. We're going to fine you. They fined us $15,000 for bringing the case. I'm going to say one thing, or one group line. You know the warnings were ignored. You know the counterterrorism operations that Richard Carter in charge of were shut down. You know that Bush was told Al-Qaeda seems to attack the United States, and he told the guy, okay, you've covered your ass, forget it. You know that the Project for New American Century said we need a new Pearl Harbor so that we can get the population to go along with putting armies down in Asia, in Central Asia, and in the Middle East, so we can control that oil. Now that all happened, and nobody can deny that any of that happened. So take it from there. Read David Ray Griffin's books.
All the way back. No, Jane, yeah.
I just want to make a comment. It seems to me that all this stuff is campaign finance reform. I don't know why we go on issue after issue. We say the same thing for 40 years, and it gets worse. The Congress is, the whole structure of the government is so distorted now. And the major way of going after that, it seems to me, is campaign finance reform, with public financing of campaigns. And why not stop all this other stuff and work on that?
There is, the move afoot to overturn Citizens United, which is the other piece of that. Plus, it's the same about campaign financing, though. It's about money in elections.
I don't mean reforming. I mean changing it entirely. And that's public financing.
Somebody's got to vote it in, though, don't they?
Yeah.
They have to pass a law. The Congress has to pass a law.
Yes, I know. So we're fighting. There's so many people fighting for everything in this country. But I don't see that there's a big thing for fighting for that.
Because I don't think people think that there's much future in it.
Possibility.
You know, I mean, it's one of the problems that ought to be reformed, but if you reformed it, you'd still have rich people running for office. And
Yeah, but
see,
you level the playing field, Dennis. You would level the playing field and make it possible for people to run who are not just totally bankrolled.
But somebody would have to decide that that's what's going to be done.
It's a conversation. Man in the corner has a question.
All right. Given that the current politicians holding public office got where they are, almost all of them, by getting, I can't stand up. You'll have to just listen to me while I'm sitting down. All right.
Do it a little louder.
All right. Now, given that the politicians holding public office, nearly all of them, got their money from rich people and big corporations, why does anybody here think that they would elect to risk getting voted out by voting right now for campaign finance reform?
I don't think they would, and that's why I asked, where's our revolution that we keep talking about? I don't think Congress is going to do it on their own.
Okay. Question asked. Anybody here want to comment on it, or should I go on to the next question?
How would it happen otherwise?
I'm saying it won't happen.
Oh, they can't happen.
That's right. Can't happen with the current Congress as it is.
Very good.
I want to ask you about the influence that the exposure that Snowden has put out there, even in the summer. If you don't think that that has suppressed subliminal Fourth Amendment rights, you know, that people on social media and people on electronic media have tamped down really in a subliminal level, maybe not outwardly. I'm talking mostly about people who are not really in this room or wouldn't be in a room like this, that you might, like somebody that me might reach out to and they're not willing to sign on to something at a subliminal level. If that hasn't tamped down the Fourth Amendment's rights, and if there is would ever be a way to fix that, legally or judicially.
Well, it's clear. Are you talking about the Fourth Amendment or the First Amendment?
Both, but both. I'm talking about the First Amendment based on violation of the Fourth Amendment, of your Fourth Amendment.
Well,
Is it possible to reduce the watchman?
The question is, have the Snowden revelations not had the effect of scaring people, really, right? And making them back off not because Snowden revealed it, but because they found it out. That in fact, somebody is storing their emails and can open their phone conversation, find out whoever they talked to, what they said at any time. That's the question.
Well, part of it is and what they were talking about when I mentioned Greenwald and the convention was the effect it has on the media, because the threat and the reality of prosecution. You take the investigative reporters of the past, you don't have them anymore. It has that, it's not a subliminal effect, it's an actual effect. And Obama administration has prosecuted twice as many whistleblowers as all the other administrations combined, and they brag about that. So I would assume that if it has that impact on honest media people, the few that remain, that it's also going to have that effect, subliminal or not, on a good portion of the people out there like you and others. And that's the point of repression, isn't it? Is to make you afraid. Is to make you not want to take that step, not go to that demonstration, not go onto your email or whatever it is. And that's what we have to resist and figure out ways around.
And then those people that you think of as being intimidated are the people you have to go to and try and encourage to turn their mind around about that stuff. Because at least they're thinking about it to begin with. They realize there's a menace. What are they going to do? What is anybody going to do? I mean, that's the thing, isn't it, that we all
Pour gasoline on yourself and set yourself on fire.
There you go. I mean, that's a remedy that some people have resorted to in analogous situations. But the issue is how do we pull it together so there is some strength in the resistance, so that there's something that you can draw people to, that they don't have to be afraid, or they have to get over their fear of the big, the big thing, right? And join up, show their faith, stand up and count.
He might have said that a little too softly. He said stand up and be counted.
Stand up back there.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, hey, listen, the biggest problem I have with this is what we just said. What are we going to do? We live, excuse me, I'm very nervous.
Take a breath, relax.
Yeah. We live in a capitalistic society where all of us, how many times every day do we say, it's all about the money. It's all about the money. Nobody's talking about attacking the money. Everybody knows where the money is. Nobody knows that we know how to produce enough food. Nobody's paying attention that we don't need oil. We've got a lot of other things going on because there's a lot of things happening that are positive that have to do with going after the money and redirecting where you're putting your money. Anybody in this room looking for a new car? You're going to buy an electric one? Shift where you put your money. That's the only damn thing they'll understand. They don't care about protests anymore. Look what's going on. They just put us in jail, man. They don't give a crap about that. They got the Ninja Turtle suits and the pepper spray. I can't afford to deal with that.
You said a lot of good things are going on. Could you name one or two? Seriously.
Seriously. If we were to plant hemp everywhere we could, hemp cleans the air just
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you. I know that's true. one or two things that are actually going on now that people, that you are suggesting people hook up with.
There's a dude down in the stockyards that built a building and is
space.
doing indoor, got a space. He's doing indoor farming. He's proving what the reefer growers proved a long time ago. Without soil, we can grow everything we need.
I'm sorry, that's called the plant, right?
Yes.
Right, okay. All right.
Sorry.
I mean, that one, don't be sorry. I mean, your outrage is totally. Do I have another question out there dying to be asked? Okay, I got one there and one there, so go ahead.
At the risk of putting aside our hemlock cocktails, I thought I'd offer positive note. A couple of months ago, a local Chicago published progressive news magazine called In These Times, wrote a story about the Colorado model. Over the past several years, the state of Colorado has had a grassroots, nonprofit, progressive movement that has basically elected a legislature there that has enacted the most progressive gun laws in the country. They've done immigration reform, voter reform, and everybody knows about the marijuana laws, but that's not the least of it. I'd like to hear if any of you are aware of the Colorado model, and if you believe that that can work in Illinois, despite Illinois now being what's often referred to as the new Louisiana. And if not, I would urge you all to read In These Times, which is a great progressive publication.
Yeah, thanks for that plug. It's a Chicago-based progressive. Sign up for it.
It's true that there's a lot of good progressive politics in Colorado, and that governor seems like an actual real person, not a, roadblock put in action by a party machine. And he got in and he brought that guy in to oversee the prisons. And the guy let half the people out of solitary. And then one of the people he left out came to his house and killed him. So,
2 steps forward, 1 step backward.
Exactly. I mean, it was a random thing. It was like,
I think I know. Partner next.
Yeah, let's make it 3 positives in a row now. There's pockets of resistance. You hear about them all the time. My brother, Flint Taylor, talked a lot about the maximum sentencing, families against maximum sentencing, and he talked about his daughter was going to be a lawyer. Before that, she fed him all that information because she was an activist first and ended up working for families against maximum sentencing. The kids are out there, and there's still old people doing it too. All these landmark cases that we heard up here, Flint reminded us, couldn't happen without movements behind them. Flint also said, I'm sorry, Mike, Dennis, you said something. It's okay. Flint really nailed it when history repeats itself. And what the government's doing, well, we did stuff against the government before, and people before us did stuff against the government, and we did it successfully. I mean, going back, the Burge proves, the Burge case, the torture case, proves you can't fight City Hall.
Right.
Every now and then. You can't fight it, but you can always fight City Hall. But occasionally you can win. And I say we just keep going at it until we get it right.
All right, guys. Who do we support to run for next president of the United States? Nobody. Don't delay the game.
Oh, Paige.
Okay, I think that no one has an answer for that.
No, I'm serious. Please don't stop me before they answer. Thank you.
The Farmer Labor Party.
it's a good question because it's not going to be a real question for a while. question of which party captivates the masses in such a way as to get its program in a driver's seat for international capitalism. I mean, you know, they're not, that's not changing without a big uproar, a big upheaval, a big breakdown, a big lot of trouble. Because there's no mechanism that would stop it from doing what it does day in, day out, all across the country, all the small places, everybody that cooperates with it, everybody that identifies with that, and this middle people who are equalized by what they watch on television.
So we should just stay out of it.
You know, I used to hate that everybody said electoral politics are horseshit, let's forget it, you know. But sort of, yeah.
Well, you're talking about presidential politics.
Yeah.
You just,
Okay, yeah, David Norwell, better support him. I mean, you better locally know what you're dealing with and who you're dealing with and who's representing you and who's speaking for you and what they're saying. And whether or not what they're saying is real or just or right.
Okay, Fran Tobin, I'm going to try some new ones. Fran, and then Miguel.
Sort of related to these last couple of comments, I recall something like 35% of Democrats changed their mind about closing Guantanamo when Obama decided not to. Is that right? Something, if I got the number approximately right?
Yes.
I think this is a where do we go, what do we do, and it's not about a specific strategy or campaign or issue, but it's about if we engage in public politics at all, we need to stop making excuses for people that fuck us. Be okay with all the time, but I'm not going to make excuses for them. I think we here in Chicago Democrats gave birth to Barack Obama. Chicago Democrats gave birth to the Dailies, and we have been making excuses for people we put in office because we voted for them. We need to stop doing that and start keep standing to our principles.
Okay, just this gal next. You guys don't get to talk for a few minutes while we get, go ahead, stand up, say your name, let's go.
And I just had it's a different aside. I understand that BP is still being allowed to dump into Lake Michigan, and I've heard that the next big topic is not going to be oil, it's going to be water. And I wonder if you know anything about BP and how, if anybody's working to stop the dumping in our water supply. We won't be able to work for anything.
I know about that stuff. We cover it on the radio show all the time.
You're right about
Not
water.
there. The water is. No, I'm not gonna. But BP just got additional permission from the Indiana to pour more crap into Lake Michigan. And we need.
President of Purdue University made that possible.
All right then. See all the information available when we talk together? There's a gal over there who's been waiting a long time, Michael, and then you're next. Don't be.
I wanted to bring it back to what they first talked about this, all of this is part of a counterinsurgency. Both the surveillance laws, the FISA, mass incarceration, throughout the whole society. But why are they having to do this? I think they're very afraid, and a lot of it is to scare the hell out of the American people to go along with whatever they say about the war on terrorism. But underneath it all is I think, a fear of not just what goes on in the United States, but a lot of what's going on in the world. And we actually have an obligation to resist, and we also have an obligation to look at what kind of a better world can we build. And it doesn't have to be built on the reformism of some capitalism that kills millions of people around the world. 10 million children starve every year, and people had better look at what kind of a revolution we can get to a better world. Woo.
going to talk about the Democratic Party a little bit. My wife brought up my lovely wife, wonderful wife Paige, brought up the question about who we're for in the next presidential election. You know, I come out of Rising Up Angry, and I'm actually wearing the Rising Up Angry pin tonight. It's a gun on it, you know. Dennis, you guys all know that we were pretty much out there along with the Panthers, the Young Lords, Patriots, AIM, etc. And it took me a long time, but I had grown up liking the Democrats. You know, I was a distant relative of Stevenson, and my dad worked for him. And so it took me a while to move away and dislike them. I did not vote after Lyndon Johnson for a while. And then we had this guy, Harold Washington, come to town, or be in town and emerge. And, you know, we were, one of the most exciting times Katie and I ever had was when Harold was here that night, and then when we won that election. And I think a lot of us were pretty joyful about that. We wish he had stuck around. I always kind of supported the Democrats on one level, not too involved, because I thought it was a more way to get money into the cities to help keep us afloat while we went about doing our organizing for social change. At one point, I made a remark at a Democratic Party meeting here, and I was asked by the ward committeeman and the alderman to run for president of the 49th Ward Democrats, which we consider to be a progressive outfit. And I took that on, and I have that role right now. And I have to say that, you know, out of our organization, we've worked closely with Jan Schakowsky, we've worked closely with David Orr, we've worked closely with Joe Moore, who we like in a lot of ways and are friends with, but we're a little critical of some moves. The reason I give currently for being involved with the Democrats is I use an analogy to my reading of Mao Zedong. And he talked about, he made an alliance with Chiang Kai-shek in order to fight off the Japanese. And I kind of look at it, and we're in a period when we need a united front, and that we're working with the Democrats in order to hold back the onslaught of fascism or right-wing Republicans. And I'm looking for the day when maybe the Democrats can battle it out and take on the, you know, that the progressive Democrats can start a new party or do something else. Now, I'm probably at a crossroads, although I think I'll give it until 2014, 2016. I just am throwing that out. Maybe it's a confessional. Maybe it's like a sharing. I got an email today from Steve Tapas, a fellow brother in Rising Up Angry, saying, have a good time tonight. I know I wish I could be there. I'm glad Dennis is there. Maybe he can wean you from the Democratic Party. So I seriously, though, I'm sharing that because I think that there's a lot of reasons why we have to be a little schizoid on this whole issue. There are times we have to work with the Democrats and support them and root for them. There are times when, I mean, I'm sitting here fantasizing letters to Obama, who I interviewed on the stage right there, and you know, I fantasized like he would read it. But it's like, what the fuck, Barack? You know, so I'm sharing that. And any response?
He loves letters like that. I mean, I think you're supposed to do WTF now.
Any comments from
Well, I think the problem is that the Democrats have allowed all this repression to go on. They've supported it. They haven't opposed it. Jan Schakowsky voted against cutting the NSA's power. And she's one of the more progressive ones. So Obama has been a more effective evil than the Republicans have been. And you can't, in every aspect, he's kind of sold us down the river, and people love him. Even people still love him. And the black community totally loves him. But they're getting sold a pig in the poke, essentially. They got a president that talks nice, and has a nice family, but when it comes to really dealing with the issues, he's always on the side of corporations.
How about from you guys?
As Fred Anthony said, it's a class struggle, God damn it.
now is the head of the enterprise, you know, and it is a unified enterprise. It is a closed system. I mean, it's not closed in the sense that all kind of people can join it and get recruited into it, and get sucked into it, and get suckered into it. But you know, the viewpoint that there are circumstances in which we, the people's movements, have to align themselves with what the Democratic Party is trying to accomplish is not necessarily always wrong. But the fact is, if you look at it, we got a one-party system, a war party, a business party, you know, and they switch off just like that cartoon that used to be in The Nation where they showed the Russian and Uncle Sam each taking turns screwing the world, you know, and you know that 100% of what's happening nationally in national politics now, if what's his name had won the election, I forgot who ran against him. If it were Bush, people would be up in arms for the same stuff.
Yeah.
If Bush said that about how we got control, don't worry, we're taking care of the NSA, he'd have been laughed off the stage of history. You know, although he wouldn't have left, he'd have just stayed. You know.
Yeah.
Go on, Flint.
Guys.
What about Flint?
Well, you know, it's...
You guys vote.
I voted. I had a damn existential crisis in the voters' booth, and because I thought I woke up and went down there thinking I'm going to vote for McKinney. No, McKinney. What's her name?
Cynthia McKinney.
Who was a righteous woman, you know, a Democrat, an ex-Democrat.
Green Party.
And I got in there and I told them all this stuff, the whole world is watching to see if Barack can get over. I said, I'm not going to go against that. I want to be with that. You know?
Got that D on my head.
So I voted for him. I mean, what difference does it make? You know?
Well, you know, it's very difficult when you see, as the election unfolds, and you see the virulent racism and the reaction and how right-wing the opposition is. It's very difficult not to get caught up in wanting to resist that.
Right.
And that's what I think catches a lot of us up. And then, but intellectually, we understand that, you know, he's not going to want to or be able to accomplish the things that it is easy for him to say. And he's a wonderful speaker. He can work you up around, you know, he's probably going to give another great speech in a couple of days around I Have a Dream and the demonstration from 50 years ago. So emotionally is one thing, but intellectually is an entirely different thing. And you talk about young people. When my kid was in 8th grade, she heard Barack came to her school and someone asked her about the death penalty, and he kind of danced around, and she came home and told us he was full of shit then. But she voted for him too, you know.
That was a pretty well drawn out picture of the complication there. I'm going to say a couple things just to invite you guys to end it.
No, don't end it. Juice it up.
Juice it up. Well, no, there were a number of issues brought up that we should starting with the food one, Monsanto, GMO. These are issues that are, in fact, very, very central to our lives, feeding ourselves. The water issue. I think these are areas where there are thousands and thousands of your fellow countrymen and women activated and acting. And all you have to do is go online. The group of folks that are against Keystone Pipeline are an incredibly coordinated bunch going across the country this summer, including right up here at Mackinac Bridge, where most of us probably didn't know there's a 60-year-old pipeline in the Great Lakes taking oil, tar sands from Alberta down to Michigan. The same oil company that fouled Kalamazoo River 3 years ago and hasn't cleaned it up yet is asking to send 3 times the tar sands through that 60-year-old pipeline. Now, that's the sort of thing that gets my blood going, and that I also feel we should put our bodies where our mouths are on this stuff. So there's a meeting in Chicago, if you go to Code Pink's website, giving you a chance to comment on drone warfare within a couple weeks here in Chicago. It's official and all that sort of thing, and they're going to have elected officials. But I think what I was going to pose towards the latter part of this is sharing information about what can be done. What shall we do? And so if anyone has a couple of very specific groups or actions or, communities that are coming together, in your mind, addressing these things in a good way, in a useful fashion, not good, in a useful fashion, we want to hear about it. And I will say one other thing. I have registered voters for many, many years. I have worked in polling places. I have worked campaigns for everybody from David Orr, who's sitting here, the vote-gettingest politician in Cook County, and the only one present for this particular event, because I do not believe in ignoring the most powerful force in our country or being outside of it. I don't believe we should not have something to say about the elections and about who runs and how they are carried out. In terms of all these laws that, North Carolina and Texas just passed. Are you going to say something about that? Are you aware of it? Okay, people for months now in North Carolina have something going on called Moral Mondays. Can I get a witness? It is so hip. Every single Monday, people like you and I, and other people who have probably less and more money in their pockets, are getting arrested on everything from rights of women to choose to knocking down the privatization of public education to all of the serious issues that we've talked about here. Every Monday in North Carolina, people have been demonstrating. People are singing, which apparently is against the law in Madison right now, but they continue to get up there and sing. And get arrested for it. Now I guess you can even get arrested for watching people sing. Okay, so really we absolutely need one another, and you're right, we need humor, but we also need to get off our duffs, quit freaking whining, and get out there. There are so many things you can get out there on. So do it, Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'd just like to say one thing, it's kind of an addendum to what's going on. But,
a little louder.
But as you might know, we have our 1 foot and perhaps almost 2 feet into Syria. After our Secretary of State said we're in dire shape, it looks like we're going to go into Syria in some kind of a military way. And I'm asking everyone here, I called the comment line for whatever it's worth, but there have been calls on not going into Syria from my response. And please call us because we need a heavy response before we have another Iraq. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's let you guys have the final say. Your hopes for the future. I know a lot of people here are fathers and grandfathers. What do you see for your kids and your grandkids' future, and what do you put your hope in? What makes you smile these days?
One of the younger ones first.
Reefer doesn't count.
Why not?
You didn't tell us you're going to ask that question.
I know, I didn't tell you. I didn't.
Particularly after 2 hours. I feel like I don't have a whole lot more to add that hasn't already been said very eloquently by not only my two compatriots here, but certainly by Katie and all of the people out there. I think that the hope is in continuing the fight. The hope is in continuing the struggle and raising the issues that will keep this planet from being extinct in 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing it for 45 years, and it's a long time, but I think you get a certain amount of support for the fact that you're in struggle. Being in struggle itself is reaffirming. So you might not win all your cases, or you might not win all your political struggles, but the fact that you're still fighting for a just society is something that you can take strength in. So I say continue to struggle, continue to fight, and power to people.
Right on. That's right, and you know, you find that the other people that you connect to in these movements are better people than the ones who are sitting home watching TV. You know, they're more interesting, they're more positive, they're more forthcoming, you know, and trustworthy. You know, they do the things they say they're going to do. Not always, not fully, but you know, their heart's in the right place. You can connect it because you can feel it, and you need that. And that's what keeps any of these movements going, is the solidarity that people have with each other, and that they find it. There's nothing that has kept any of us doing what we do than the other people that we work with, and the ability to, you know, share the burden of these feelings, you know, that are so hard to take, of the difficulty of it, and the length of it, and the unreasonableness of the other side, of the opposition, the power and lack of mercy that's in the authority. And it's a deep mystery how it affects people, because those are people too. Those are human beings that are doing these things, and that will be doing these things to us, you know, and that we are up against